Hi, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving and welcome to our series on the future of learning. As all of you know, I am extremely passionate about where learning is headed, and this series is designed to bring you next-gen teachers, creators, experts, entrepreneurs who are all thinking about and acting on where the future of learning is headed. And so, as you know, our first two sessions, we had Jerry Colonna, who runs Reboot, the future of leadership education. And our last expert last week was David Perel, who's doing amazing things in how we're teaching writing, and he runs a school called Rite of Passage. And next week, Monday, we have a phenomenal guest too, Shane Parrish, who is the founder of Farnham Street and the Knowledge Podcast. And so many more people from the Lambda School, from the Knowledge Society, Rebecca Caden from Union Square Ventures, all here to embrace what is happening and how we learn. And not just how we are educated, but actually how we learn. Today is a really, really special day because, as you know, we have a phenomenal guest. This guest is somebody I have looked up to, admired, and been inspired by for a long time. It's Seth Godin. And Seth is a true legend. You know, he has been called the demigod on the web by Forbes magazine. He's an author. He corrected me earlier because I said, you know, Seth, is this your 20th book you've written? And he said, actually, it's my 20th best-selling book that I've written. I've written 120 of them. He's a marketing guru. He's founded many companies. He's an internet entrepreneur as well. I go way back on the internet, and so does he, to the likes of Squidoo and many others. He's been inducted into the Marketing Hall of Fame. He has graced the TED stage 5 times. He's a prolific blogger. He runs this amazing podcast. Can you believe how many things I'm sharing already? And, you know, he's a prolific speaker as well. He speaks all over the world. But the reason I'm most interested in chatting with him is because at his heart, he's a teacher. He's somebody who loves to inspire people to be their best self. Seth is the founder of Akimbo, an online learning community that's focused on cohort-based peer-to-peer experiential learning experiences. And as you know, all Game Changer members, we are incubating Mastermind, which is really thinking about where the future of these live learning experiences are headed. And more than 60,000 people have taken his online courses. He is the creator of the altMBA. And it is just wonderful to have him here. So welcome, Seth. We're delighted to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. You've got all the cool kids. Rebecca is awesome. Jerry Colonna and I go way back. I was the first entrepreneur he invested in when he went out on his own. So you're off to a great start.
That.
Thank you for including me.
Thank you for coming. And, you know, as in our exchange, you know, we chatted about Fred Wilson and Wattpad because that was my previous company. And for a second, I just thought maybe Jerry, who is Fred's partner, invested in you. So there you go, small world. And thank you very much for being here. But I want to start actually with the thing that I think got you to say yes to joining us today, which is a very special place that's definitely near to my heart. And since it's Canadian Thanksgiving is a Canadian, you know, very special place, a little camp in the middle of Algonquin Park called Erewhon. Seth, when I mentioned Erewhon to you, it somehow turned the key that you agreed to be here. Tell the audience why.
Well, this would have been my 43rd summer up teaching canoeing. I wasn't forbidden from heading to Canada this year, obviously. My whole life changed up there. And part of it is the place, part of it is the approach, part of it was the time. But that's where I learned that I wanted to be a teacher. That's where I learned about enrollment. That's where I understood learning. And I can't stop going back because when you have self-directed, project-based learning done by people who want to get somewhere, human beings are unstoppable. And yet we've created this environment everywhere else where we use enforcement and compliance and coherent and getting people to be coerced into where they're headed. And then we're surprised the kids don't want to learn calculus. Well, what a surprise. Of course they don't, because we're doing it to them. We're not doing it with them or for them.
So powerful. And hence why I feel very privileged to send my son to this wonderful place, Erewhon, that, he's very excited to meet you there when you are able to come back.
Can't wait.
So let's unpack this. I can't wait too. Let's unpack this a little bit. You did an amazing TED Talk, quite a few years ago. And the question was really, what is school for? And you asked this question, and I'd love to hear, has your thinking changed? What is school for?
Well, the talk, which you can find by typing "Stop Stealing Dreams" into the Google, was at a TEDx, and I didn't have the answer to the question. I was just asking the question. I have some assertions about what I think the answer is, but we don't have an answer. So instead, we spend $1 trillion or more a year. We put an untold amount of time for every single kid for 12, 16 years in a row, and we're unable to answer the question, what's it for? Like, we know why you get the oil changed in your car. We know why you go to Yonge Street to get Chinese takeout. What's it for? It's very clear. What is school for? And I am trying to encourage parents and teachers and administrators and taxpayers to just ask the question. And my answer is two parts. It's to teach kids to solve interesting problems, and it's to teach them how to lead. And if we ended up with a world filled with people who are compassionate and caring and good humans who wanted to solve interesting problems and were ready to lead, I think we'd be pretty pleased with ourselves, because that would be what we need.
I couldn't agree more. And, hence why we're having this conversation. Can we talk a little bit about why school is the way it is? Because I'm always curious, understanding context is really helpful.
Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
you have some really interesting ideas about that.
Yeah, and I make up a lot of stuff. That's sort of what I do for a living. This is not made up. They took good notes. We know exactly why school is the way it is. Before 1850 or so, school was for a privileged few, and it was mostly, if you went for more than just a couple of years, to learn to be a priest or a minister, but also there were tiny subgroupings of people, scholars. But that was it. And around 1850, people who ran factories had a problem, which is they needed to persuade millions of people to leave the farm and come work in the factory. There was a significant shortage of factory workers, and factory owners hate that, because if there's a shortage, they have to pay extra. And so the entire function of organized schooling, which is based on a Prussian pseudo-military, paramilitary approach to educating compliant humans, the whole purpose is to get you to sit in straight rows, to be processed, to take the defects and reprocess them. I don't know if this sounds like a factory, but it should. And then after a number of years, to churn you out so that you would go to work as a young adult in a factory being told what to do. That's why we invented school. And one little sideline, the Ku Klux Klan, one of the most horrible organizations in the world, teamed up with the school reformers because they were trying to stamp out child labor. And the reason they wanted to stamp out child labor is so there'd be more jobs for adults. And so all of these things came into play, and we end up with this system of compliance. And we needed it. And for 100 years, the industrial world we live in was fueled by an endless stream of people who had been indoctrinated into thinking a certain way about their lives. But about 30 or 40 years ago, we changed what we needed. And it turns out people in North America cannot outcomply people in other countries. They cannot outwork people in other countries. And so if there's a race to the bottom, we lose, but we don't win either, which is bad too. And so we've now got robots and computers that can take the place of anything that is based on following instructions. All that's left is innovation, insight, generosity, leadership. And we don't spend 1 minute a day teaching those things at school.
So powerful and so aligned. A few years ago, I created a program called Get Curious Now. And it was from this exact experience I had sitting in a really great school, in Toronto, listening to how the curriculum was going to be taught. And of course, from my background at Wattpad and, really focusing on storytelling, creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship, I said, well, what if we just created a process that allowed kids to work on passion projects? And that's how, our very little school was born. And in those days, though, this is a few years ago, I was like, this can be a passion project, but does it really scale? And so that's my next question, which is, you seem, with 60,000 people having taken your next gen online learning experiences, to be able to answer that question. How do we think about creating these experiences that you talk of for people in place of traditional education?
Okay, so just a little context. 5 years ago, I started something called the altMBA. It is not an MBA. It takes 4 weeks. It's intensive. It's 2 or 3 hours a day. And I built it to be the opposite of every online course I could find. The typical online course at the time was really cheap or free. It had a 97% dropout rate. Think about that. That means that if it had been a class at McGill and 100 people were there, 3 would be there at the end. You'd fire any teacher that had a class like that. And so the altMBA has a 96% completion rate, the opposite, that almost everyone finishes it, even though it's grueling and intensive and you do it while you have your day job. It's not cheap. It's expensive. It's not on your own. There are live coaches, and it's not alone. There's cohorts of people who are working together. And we followed that up with a bunch of workshops, the marketing seminar, the freelancers workshop, et cetera. And 2 weeks ago, we announced that Akimbo is becoming a B Corp and thus legally bound to work in the public interest in addition to being a for-profit company. And that the two people who have been with me the longest, Alex and Marie, now run it and own it. And so I am back to making a ruckus. I still work with them. They still publish my workshops, but Akimbo is its thing, its own thing. It needs to be institutionalized to answer your question, which is, how does this work at scale? Okay, so let's go sideways a little bit, because clearly you have tech chops and your guests have tech chops. How is it that every fast-growing, successful innovation of our culture that has set a record has been a tech company, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or whatever, growing to 10 or 20 or 100 million people? And the answer is, built into the project itself is the network effect. The network effect is the most powerful tool of our day. And the network effect basically says, this works better if other people do it with you. Fax machines work better if you know someone with a fax. Because if you try to send a fax to yourself, you'll get a busy signal. That's not good. And so you tell other people to get a fax, and you tell other people to get a Twitter account, and you ask people if they saw that thing on Facebook, and you talk about TikTok, because it all works better if other people do it too.
That's right.
And so we have tried to build into our workshops 2 elements. The first element, which we've gotten right, is you can't do any of our workshops by yourself. Many of the people who have taken one of my online courses have done it at a place like Udemy or Skillshare, where it's just video. They don't work. Go ahead and do it if you want, but they don't work. The Akimbo ones work because you give and get more feed.
I just said I saw 56,000 people have taken that workshop, just by the way, on Udemy for you. But it's fascinating what you're saying, which is, it's not the same, right? It doesn't work in the same way.
It's not the same. I mean, it would be so much easier for me to just put stuff on Udemy. And I like the people there, but I get no satisfaction out of it, because I'm just like, and inside our workshops, you give or get 500 pieces of feedback a month. Most of the people in our adults in our workshop have never gotten 500 pieces of feedback in a month ever from people they care about. And so we got that part right. The hard part is the network effect, that it's easier to tell somebody about Wattpad. It's easier to tell somebody about Facebook than it is to tell them about this. And the reason is, it's scary. It's scary because you have to say, well, it's not really like school. And you have to say, and you're going to get on the hook. And you have to say, and we don't have any dark patterns to suck people in. And all of that manipulation that Silicon Valley is so good at, we don't do any of. And so Akimbo's challenge as it gets to the next cycle, they're bringing in new teachers like Ramon Ray and Margot Aaron to reach bigger communities. But I'm patient, they're patient. It's going to take a while to undo 150 years of brainwashing.
Right. So interesting. I mean, what I love about what you're saying is three things. You're talking about community, right? Like ultimately, this works because there's a community of people. You're talking about feedback, right? Which is how people ultimately learn, and doing, right? This isn't about theorizing. This is about putting yourself out there. What I loved, when I read about it is all projects are in public, right? And so there's this sense of getting over this fear that I'm fascinated by. And the last is this empathy of understanding that journey. Can you talk a little bit more? When you think about fast forward to the future, and it's not that we are living the future in many ways, is another way to put it. But you talk a little bit about famous school, right? And sort of the end of famous school. What do you mean by that? And did you yourself go to famous school? I'm very
I went
curious.
to super famous school. First, I got rejected by famous school. I got rejected by Brown. I still remember their letter word for word that I got when I was 18 years old. So I went to Tufts, which was the college for people who had resources but didn't get into famous school. But then I went to famous business school, like Stanford famous. And I learned a lot about how hollow famous school is. Famous school, like you can take every single course at MIT for free. And you could pay $250,000 to go there as an undergrad. What's the difference, particularly in the age of COVID? Well, the only difference is you get a piece of paper if you go and pay the $250,000. So that makes it super clear what famous school is for. Famous school is not about learning. Famous school is about buying a piece of paper and having proximity to other people who get into famous school. And there was a study done, I can't remember how long ago, in which they tracked people who got into Harvard and went and people who got into Harvard and didn't go. And it turns out people who got into Harvard and didn't go were just as wealthy, just as happy, just as everything as people who got in and did go. Because Harvard is basically a sorting function. It is not a learning institution. And sorting functions are fine. In a world of scarcity, we need sorting functions. But we shouldn't build our whole world around them. We shouldn't go into 30 years of debt for them. And we mostly should not persuade ourselves that we are a good parent or a good human because we or someone related to us went to a famous college. And having raised two extraordinary young men, when they were teenagers, I was the most obnoxious parent around because I insisted that people, when they talked about their kid getting into a good school, that they just say famous school instead, because it is a famous school.
Right.
There's no evidence at all that it's good.
Super interesting. And what I think you are highlighting is this idea of signaling, right? Signaling and the ability to say you've went, in a sea of people. But you mentioned something interesting, which is in a world of scarcity. Do you believe today we're living in a world of scarcity? Or how does this change if you're living from an abundant mindset?
Yeah. Okay, so the industrial world solved a whole bunch of scarcity problems that, in 1850, you couldn't buy a calculator, you couldn't buy a car, you couldn't buy a parachute, you couldn't get on an airplane. I mean, there's this endless list of things that industrialism addressed. It's still massively under distributed, right? There's still enormous amounts of dislocation, but there are more people on Earth with a cell phone than clean water. And we've created this ratchet in which that sort of scarcity is diminishing. However, there's an abundance of possible connection, possible insight, possible caring. The number of people who are within one block of where you are right now, who you could connect to, is enough to keep you busy for the rest of your life. It's abundant. And so when we think about something like the Billboard top charts. It used to be that if you were one of the top 10 Billboard singles, you were made forever. Now there isn't one Billboard hit list. There's 1,000 Billboard hit lists. And so again, scarcity is reduced because the long tail shows up. Now it turns out that you can't clean the board. There is no homepage of the internet. The way it used to be scarce to be on CBS, it is not scarce to be on YouTube. Anyone can be on YouTube. There's an abundance of broadcast channels. And I can list 50 things where there's an abundance. And so when we think about a scarcity mindset, there's forced rankings, right? There's billionaires who are richer than you, Mr. Billionaire. Oh, I feel bad, right? We're drawn to forced rankings because we were brainwashed to seek scarcity. And we walk away from abundant opportunities. And so one of the things I love about Wattpad is Wattpad was one of the very first publishing companies that fully adopted an abundant mindset. That was the opposite of Random House and the New York Times bestseller list.
Right. So absolutely. And let's push on that, because ultimately what we're doing at Wattpad and what we believe today, is there's creators, and anybody can become a creator, right? And, at the heart of it, creators in many ways are teachers. Or many teachers need to be creators. I guess that's part a question, part a comment that I'm asking you. But in an abundant world, let's talk about the future of teaching and the future of being a creator, something you've done so well in your life. How does teaching change?
So we have to say that there's two kinds of teachers. There are teachers who have enrollment and there are teachers who don't. If a student says, will this be on the test? The teacher does not have enrollment because they have coerced the person into the room in exchange for a piece of paper. You don't need coercion to get someone to want to ride a bike or to learn to juggle or to learn to paddle a canoe. They don't have to show up if they don't want to. And if they show up, they're eager. They're leaning into it. That's a different kind of teaching than the Cheech and Chong screaming at the kids in the back row who aren't paying attention. I was stunned still to this day. A colleague went to Penn State. Penn State has more students than the typical town. And every single student at Penn State was issued at their own expense a clicker. And what you had to do is when you were in a lecture hall, you had to click to prove that you were there. And if you didn't prove that you were there, you got a demerit. And that wasn't enough because some kids started pooling clickers, and then someone would bring 10 clickers to the thing and click their 9 friends. So then they started making it so that you had to answer questions during the lecture to prove that you were there. And I'm like, you should just shut down Penn State. Shut down any school that has a clicker. Because if you're really spending $250,000 to prove that you're in the room, you're a monkey. You're a Pavlovian trained German Shepherd that isn't there to learn a thing. And that's not teaching by my measure.
Absolutely. So what is teaching? Tell us more around what teaching looks like, and certainly teaching today in a world where you can't even be in a physical classroom, right? The internet is your classroom today. What does it mean for teachers?
So for me, it's self-directed and project-based. Self-directed meaning learn what you want to learn. There's no purpose in compliance or tests. Learn what you want to learn. If you don't want to learn it, leave the room. If you do want to learn it, I'm going over there. I'm going over there. Come with me if you want. And project-based because everything's open note and open book for the rest of our lives, right? So what have you shipped? Right. What have you built? What have you edited? What have you brought to the world? There's a chain of schools called the Acton Academy, and I'm flattered that some of their work is influenced by me. I have nothing to do with them. But the Acton Academy, typical facility, has 55 kids in it and 2 adults, one of whom is in charge of maintenance. So that's it. And the first rule is you can't ask an adult a question. So we got all these 10-year-olds teaching 6-year-olds and 15-year-olds teaching 9-year-olds. And you go there and it doesn't matter what you do, but you got to do something. And you got to tell people what you're going to do, and then you got to do it. And there's a report card every week. with no grades in it, just your projects. What have you done? And what's stopping anyone from learning that way? And tell
Right.
me if after 12 years of this, some kid walks into the world and says, I've shipped 4,000 projects. I know how to teach kids. I know how to learn from people who don't have authority over me. I do projects and I'm really good at leading. Do you want to hire that person? Do you want to marry that person? Do you want to be friends with that person? Why isn't this everywhere?
Totally. I'm smiling with such a big smile on my face because I'm so aligned with the thinking. So much so, my kids, poor them, they have me as their mother, which is all about shipping product and doing creative endeavors. But also, I'd like to just give a big shout out to Maggie on our team, who's 16 years old, who came to us because she saw a job posting for a content extraordinaire. And she put her hand up, but she didn't just put her hand up. She actually wrote the Notion document of how she would change our content and our social. And I've never, to this day, been more inspired and impressed by
Yep.
a young person than Maggie. So Maggie, on Thanksgiving Day, just a big shout out to you and saying thank you. So to your point on kids taking learning, age is really quite meaningless today. So speaking of that, I actually want to dive deeper into lifelong learning and the role of learning in organizations and in marketing. What you're doing, which is peer-based, peer-to-peer, cohort-based live learning experiences today. At Mastermind, we think this is the future. This is the future of how we're going to learn. Can you talk about where you see learning, not education, but learning going in the next little bit?
I think the most important thing, and I'll bring it up again, is we have to unindoctrinate people about enrollment. So I still feel badly because a few years ago, Adobe bought Macromedia. Macromedia made freehand. I was the best freehand jockey in the world. I could make my ideas happen in freehand. And they rolled it into Illustrator. So I grudgingly learned Illustrator, but I wasn't really enrolled in it. And since then, they've upgraded it 9 times, and I have not kept up. And so every time I see this tool, I feel stupid. And so I know that feeling that so many adults have of feeling stupid. And what's shifting in the world right now is if you don't want to feel stupid, you don't have to feel stupid. And that's new. That adult learning was really hard or expensive or fraught, and now it's not if you're enrolled. So what would it mean to be enrolled? So I built a canoe in my backyard over the last 3 months, cedar strip, 16-foot prospector, chestnut style. And I had no clue.
Amazing.
I had no clue. I made so many mistakes. And most adults don't want to do that. Most adults want to do a Lego kit or a jigsaw puzzle because they can get it right. Because we've been brainwashed into getting it right. And my aside about Lego, I don't know if your kids are still into Lego or not. Lego had
Sure.
a series of 9 rules about the rules of Lego for 50 years. That was their mantra. One of them is every piece must have multiple functions. And the rules were going to get them into bankruptcy. They were going to fold. Not many years ago, they were very close to folding. And then some guy invented Lego kits. And Lego kits are all the pieces you need to make one thing. And you follow this endless set of instructions, and then you have a pirate ship. And then you get rid of the pirate ship and buy more. And Lego kits break my heart because Lego kits are not about learning. They're about education.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. And so much so, I have a huge Lego table downstairs of which, my son is recreating with all his old parts, new things. And he'd like to create a store on the internet to sell creative versions of Lego kits. So we'll be sure to send you the link one day. But I think what you're talking about is really, really important around lifelong learning. It's the unlearning of what we've had to learn. the unlearning for a new era that you've done such a good job in your work talking about. And one thing I want to bring up is you have this amazing book coming. I've pre-ordered my copy, called The Practice, and I think you actually say some interesting things, certainly in what I've read about it. But the one that I really loved is, creativity is a skill, not a gift. And you really have talked about this idea of attitude as a skill. And I wonder if you could share, Seth, especially for adults, what are some of the attitudes that we need in order to thrive in creativity in this future?
All right, so let's take that into little bits, because there's a culture that wants creative people to be somehow special, that they had a special upbringing, that they were an orphan abandoned in the jungle, or they had perfect parents or something in between, or that the muse came and touched their soul, or whatever it is, that you have to find your calling. This is all nonsense. And we make it up because it's safer than acknowledging that at least once in our life we said something useful, interesting, funny, or creative. Because if you said it once, now we're not discussing whether you're creative or not. We're just discussing how often are you creative, which is a totally different discussion. And so I believe that talent is fairly non-existent. It mostly has to do with things like dunking a basketball or ballet. Because like you could even argue, some people do, that perfect pitch is a talent, that being able to hear a note and saying what it is something you're born with. Interesting to note that among people born in Beijing or Shenzhen or other parts of China, they're 3 times more likely to have perfect pitch than people in the United States. So you say, oh yeah, clearly it's genetic. Except Chinese descendants in the United States have the same perfect pitch rate as people like me, because it's not your DNA, it's did you grow up in a house where they're speaking Chinese? Because if you grew up in a house where they're speaking Chinese, they're singing their language to each other, not the way we do in English. And so even perfect pitch is a skill. It is not a talent. So if we accept the fact that it is possible to do creative work, you just have to decide you want to. And that want to is an attitude. And that attitude, like honesty, like hard work, like perseverance, like grit, is a skill. You can learn it, maybe from amazing parents like you, maybe from your peers, maybe just because you're tired of getting stuck, but you can learn it. And that's the thing we have to teach the most.
I love that. I think that's it's very hopeful and is very democratizing, which I think is the key to what you're saying, is this old system where there was scarcity need no longer apply, especially for creators, and people who are willing to ship product or put their work out. So I'm super sensitive to the fact that we have 10 minutes left of this, really for our community, and we have some amazing questions. But I want to end this with one or two more questions, and then head to our audience. The first question is, Seth, you've been at the forefront of marketing and what's coming for a long time. You basically invented permission marketing. You were early in blogs. You were early in podcasting. You understand online community. How do you think about the future of live learning? Where does it go? Do you see? Yeah, let me ask you that.
Sal Khan talked about flipping the classroom and doing homework during the day with each other and doing the lectures at night from Best in Class. I cannot think of one reason to have live lectures. I can't. Mm-hmm. Lectures should not be done as a cottage industry around the world. We should find the single best lecture about intro to symbolic logic, and that should be the one people watch until someone comes up with a better one. On the other hand, doing your homework together, that's how you learn something. And so I think live learning is about that part, not about making lectures happen in real time.
I love that. So it's not about the sage on the stage. It's truly about a cohort of people learning together, and helping each other on this thing called the internet, which I think is
Exactly.
super, super interesting. So that is fantastic. One last question for you, as somebody who is absolutely a lifelong learner and really curious. What are you most curious about these days? Who are you learning from, and what do you want to learn next?
The internet goes in fits and starts. It used to be that I would get an issue of Wired magazine, and 3 hours later, my life was totally changed. In fact, right over there, I have every issue of Wired magazine until a year ago. And now it's just like, oh yeah, we knew that was going to happen one day soon. So I think we are in this in-between moment when it comes to, GPT-3 plus always on plus high speed plus 17 other things that are going to be a little different. But virtual reality and augmented reality aren't what they were hyped up to be. So I don't think being the next is a useful thing to be on someone's radar. Here's what's happened in the last 25 years. 4 billion people have an email address. You can contact anybody you want who wants to hear from you anytime you want for free. That was true 25 years ago. That's more true now. That's it. That's the one. Permission marketing. Anticipated personal and relevant messages to people who want to get them. Go do that. And whatever happens with tech will be fine. But I think the old new thing is way more interesting right now than the new thing.
I couldn't agree more. And we're hearing that more and more, which is this idea of owned platforms, which is your own relationship with people versus social platforms. And so do you have a comment on that? Like, do you think we're going to see a pushback from creators and teachers and experts relying on earned platforms or social platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I've been wrong about so many things. I said the web was never going to amount to anything. That one cost me $40 billion. But it turns out human beings really like the scarcity mindset, social status, easy in Roach Motel of social media. They just do. They will give up almost anything, as Tim Wu has said, for convenience. People don't care about privacy. People don't care about owning their platform. They just want to be popular today. They want to get rid of their tension and their fear today. And maybe we'll wake up. If I hadn't owned my blog for the last 20 years, my assets would not be what they became, because no one can tell me what I can put on my blog. And no one can tell me we're shifting and you're out of luck. That has happened to me again and again and again on other platforms. Google shut down a business I started. It took them 2 weeks to drive us to zero. Right. You want to figure out who can you talk to who wants to hear from you. And you might want to trust a platform. Like I trust MailChimp more than I trust some social media company. But ideally, you want to be able to find that asset when you need it.
Absolutely. So Seth, we have an amazing community here who have some great questions for you. In the interest of time, I'm going to read them and we'll do these rapid fire. But Andrew wrote, how do you embed reflection into the learning process?
Right. So reflection is what the peers do with each other after they've seen the lecture. That's the key. It's not present in the education process, but it is present in the learning process.
Awesome. And Patrick Pelagi says, he's taking a gap year now. Is there something you think would be great if I noticed more?
Well, I think the way I'll know if you're noticing it is if I could see what you ship. Why not use this gap year to get really, 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 really good at something specific and then ship it on the regular? Because if you commit to that, the noticing will take care of itself.
Awesome. So today's Thanksgiving in Canada. So I see some kids are watching with their parents too. And this is from Vim. He's 9 years old. What inspired you to write books is his question.
Oh, there's no question it was you, Vim.
Totally.
That's the answer.
That's
If people
awesome.
didn't read, if
There you
people didn't
go.
read my books, they'd be way too much work. I would write my blog even if no one read it, but books, I write them for my readers.
Love that. Go read his next book called The Practice. Sarah McLennan asks, thanks, Seth. How can we build curiosity, connection, and shared purpose inside our companies as we work remotely during these uncertain and anxious times?
Okay, so one of the problems with working remotely is not that you're working from home, but that you're living in the office. And that the people who you work for are taking attendance. They're jamming you into Zoom calls for no reason. And they're trying to hold on to the scarcity and control mindset of the industrialist. And it's in this moment that a few people are going to show up and say, what if we did projects instead, where we didn't have to take attendance? And that is going to cause work to change. Now, it's not going to change easily because people are filled with fear. They're filled with fear because the world doesn't feel stable and because they've seen before what happens to people who don't comply. And so there's a tension between those two things, and that's the hard work. The hard work is being able to say to someone who's curious, as long as you're shipping the work, you should be as curious as you want. Not, why don't you sit down and do 2 more hours of busy work because we're paying you.
Really good answer. Thanks, Seth. So I'm going to ask one more because I know Seth has a hard stop at 12:45, and we're going to honor that hard stop. The last question, there's a bunch here, Seth, but we're going to have to pick and choose, but is from Raheem, and he says, how long have universities in their current form got left?
I think in the next 2 years, 20% of them will go bankrupt.
Wow. I hear you. So, Seth, I am super grateful for this amazing experience to be in conversation with you. Keep doing all that you do. You know, you're inspiring a new way of thinking at all levels of education for young people, in companies, in creatives, in the freelance economy, in the creator economy, for entrepreneurs. We're really appreciative of all the generosity that you give and the fact that you're really human and you treat marketing and you make companies really realize that this is all about people and humans. So, Seth, a real delight having you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well,
And,
thank you,
today's...
Candice. And I'm really glad you're changing the game because the work matters.
Oh, thank you so much. We're very excited. We'd love to keep in touch with you. And today is Thanksgiving, and I actually take it really seriously. I listened to a really beautiful meditation this morning, which is all about grace through gratitude. And I think for all of us, if we can all just really focus on all that we do have right now, we can have a bit more grace in our lives and in the work that we do. And so that starts with just being profoundly grateful for you joining us, for our production partner, Nathan at Either Live, who's doing this on Thanksgiving Monday, for the executive producer, who some of you I don't think actually know is my husband, Corey Marr, who's a real TV, film, and podcast producer who's making this happen. So thank you, Corey. To my kids for letting me do this on Thanksgiving Monday, and to my amazing team, Maggie, Jerome, and Samantha, and my new partner in crime, Krista Kornick, who's building Mastermind with me. I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to be at the forefront of learning with people like Seth. And we have amazing partners. Our live stream partners include Toronto Life Insider, York University, who's really interested in where this is going, General Assembly, the Knowledge Society, Getting Smart, Tech Toronto, Rotman, the Canadian Innovation Exchange, and W North. Thank you so much for partnering with us to bring these conversations to our community. And just a quick reminder, next week we have the amazing Shane Parrish, who runs Farnham Street and is an author of 2 amazing books about mental models and the Knowledge podcast, joining us. So don't miss that. And Seth, it is 12:45 on the dot. We are going to let you go.
Thanksgiving is a very special day, particularly when we're thinking about Indigenous peoples, First Nations. It's bittersweet, but it's a time for reflection. And several years ago, Alex Peck and I put together something that's free. It's called the Thanksgiving Reader. You can get it at thethanksgivingreader.com. It's basically a Haggadah for your Thanksgiving table. You go around and each read something. It's beautifully illustrated. I don't usually blog about it for Canadian Thanksgiving because, Canadians, they're self-effacing. But check out the thanksgivingreader.com. It's our gift to you. Anyway,
Oh,
have a
I
wonderful
love that.
holiday.
Thank
Big
you.
hugs.
Have a great day. You too.
Bye-bye.
Take care.